Hello, fellow creators. So today I wanted to talk about a very important topic, space, everything around us. What is it? What are we focusing on? And if we're focusing on it in times of stress or in times of hardship, what's the result as opposed to just feeling the space? Now, this might be an abstract concept, and it might be something that you're not quite yet familiar with. So without further ado, here's Dr. Joe Dispenza on really how we can understand what is space, what is this concept we call space, and how does it ultimately affect our reality.
What is this thing called space? Now, there is a formula that we use that we have scientifically measured and proven that begins to create more brain coherence and more brain integration. Now, think about this. When you focus on matter, when you focus on an object or a thing, we could say that you narrow your focus on that material object, and your senses are what's doing that. So then we call that object focus or a narrow focus, or what we call a convergent focus. And when you throw in the hormones of stress, and stress is when your brain and body are knocked out of homeostasis, when your brain is knocked out of balance, those very chemicals heighten your senses for you to narrow your focus on the threat, on the object or the thing that's creating the stress. Now, that's been very adaptive over the course of thousands of years. But if 70% of the time we're living by the hormones of stress, it's entirely possible that we become habituated, that we focus on what we call the particle in quantum physics. We narrow our focus on matter. Now, according to the quantum model of reality, reality is both a particle and a wave. It's both matter and energy. So the arousal of those stress hormones heighten our senses to become materialists. And if we can't see it, then it doesn't exist for us. And so people who get switched on and stuck in this state, when they're threatened or when there's danger, or they feel like they can't predict an outcome in their life, or they're losing control, or they have the perception that things are going to get worse, when they move into survival, they begin to try to control everything in their life. So they shift their attention to one person, to another problem, to another thing, to another place. And each one of those elements has a neurological network in the brain. And so then the more you live by the hormones of stress and the more you're shifting your attention, the more you're activating these circuits, the timing of how these circuits should be functioning together all of a sudden functions out of order. In other words, according to our brain scan measurements, our research, a person who's living by the hormones of stress, if you were to measure their brain in that state, the brain is very incoherent. Different compartments of the brain that should be communicating with each other are now no longer connected to one another. And if you were to measure those brainwave patterns, we could say they're very incoherent, like a group of drummers banging on the drums at the same time with no rhythm. Now, when the brain is incoherent, you're incoherent. When the brain isn't working right, you're not working right. Now, the other type of focus is what's called a divergent focus. It's what we call a broad focus. It's what we call an open focus. And many traditions for thousands of years have practiced an open focus. So then if you were to go from a narrow focus to an open focus, and I asked you to focus on nothing, I asked you to focus on space. If I had you broaden your awareness, no longer on matter, but sensing the field or the space around you, as if you were sensing where your hands were, the act of opening your awareness does some very profound things. Number one, when you're sensing space, you're no longer thinking. If you're no longer thinking, you're no longer activating those circuits in your brain. And as you sense space, all of a sudden, if you're thinking less, something magical happens. You begin to slow your brain waves down. And when you're living under the gun of the fight or flight nervous system, the arousal of those chemicals causes your brain to move into what's called high beta brainwave patterns. That's emergency. If you keep doing it, there's an incoherent beta brainwave state, and now the brain is really out of balance. As you begin to sense space, if you're sensing and you're no longer thinking, you're no longer activating these circuits, you begin to slow your brainwaves down from that high beta brainwave pattern to a mid-range to a low level, and all of a sudden you start moving into alpha. Now, beta is when your outer world is more real than your inner world, especially in high beta. All your attention is on your body, your environment, and time. And so then, when you're living in that state, in that high beta state, you believe your outer world is more real than your inner world, and it's not a time to create. It's not a time to learn. It's not a time to open your heart. It's not a time to imagine new possibilities. It's a time to run, fight, or hide. So then, when you sense space and you begin to relax and feel safe, your brainwaves move into an alpha brainwave state where all of a sudden the imaginary world of your inner world starts becoming more real than your outer world. You can become aware of your outer world, but you're less aware of it and you're more aware of your inner world. Point number one. Point number two, if you're not thinking, you're probably not analyzing. And the whole purpose of meditation is to get beyond the analytical mind. One of the purposes anyway. And what separates the conscious mind from the subconscious mind is the analytical mind. Now, 95% of who you are by the time you're 35 years old is a lot of unconscious, automatic habits, emotional reactions, beliefs, perceptions, hardwired attitudes that have been cultivated by you doing the same thing, thinking the same way, reacting emotionally the same way. So you can't change that with your conscious mind. You have to get into the operating system. So as you begin to sense space and you're no longer activating these circuits, you begin to open the door between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind when you overcome your analytical mind. Now you're in the operating system where you can make significant changes. If you get really good at this, you're sensing space, your brain waves, according to our research, will move into even theta brainwave patterns. Not just any kind of alpha or theta brainwave patterns. We're talking about very coherent alpha and brainwave patterns. Now, why? When you're no longer activating these circuits because you're no longer thinking about a person or a thing or a problem or a place or a past experience, and you're slowing your brain waves down, by you sensing space, as you begin to slow your brain waves down, you begin to connect to a system called your autonomic nervous system. Consciousness is falling out of the thinking brain and literally into the limbic brain, the seat of your autonomic nervous system. Now, our research shows then, when the autonomic nervous system becomes activated, because that's where your awareness is, the autonomic nervous system's job is to create coherence, to create balance, to create health. And as you get beyond yourself, because you're not thinking about your body, you're not thinking about the people in your life, the things you own, the place you need to be, and time itself, that is the moment your consciousness begins to connect to the consciousness of the unified field. And all of a sudden, this autonomic nervous system begins to merge with your conscious mind, and it begins to create coherence in your brain. And different compartments of the brain that were once subdivided because of the hormones of stress begin to synchronize. They begin to connect. Larger communities in the brain, more real estate begins to organize. And all of a sudden now, what syncs in the brain links in the brain. And all of a sudden, your brain becomes more orderly and more coherent. And all of a sudden, you start feeling more like yourself than you had in a very long time. So then, the formula that we use to create brain coherence is to focus on nothing, to focus on space and open our awareness. Now, why is that significant? Well, it's very simple. The quantum field is an invisible field of information that exists beyond this space and time. There's no bodies there, there's no people, there's no things, there's no places, there isn't even time. It's an infinite field of eternal blackness where there's nothing material, but where all possibilities exist. And you can experience that field with your senses because you experience three-dimensional reality with your senses. So then, as you begin to open your awareness and you begin to connect to this field of information, its signature, this unified field, is unification, it's oneness, it's wholeness, it's greater degrees of oneness and order. So if where you place your attention is where you place your energy, as you begin to connect to that field of information and you pay attention to it, and you stay present with it, and you stay conscious of it moment after moment after moment, sooner or later, your nervous system is going to begin to become more orderly. It's going to become more synchronized. You're going to begin to entrain to that unified field. So just because you can't see something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. In other words, there's nothing there for you to experience with your senses. You can only experience the quantum field with your awareness. So then, as you connect to that invisible field of information and you begin to tune into it and you can stay present with it, all of a sudden now it's starting to be reflected in your biology. And so then, take away all the people, all the bodies, all the things, all the places, and even time itself. Take away the earth, the moon, all the planets, take away the stars, the light from the stars, everything material in this three-dimensional reality. And what are you left with? A big empty space, a void of anything physical. Now that void is where all possibilities exist. And so as you advance in this work, you have to become comfortable as an awareness that's disconnected from your identity, disconnected from your body, disconnected from the people in your life, your cell phone, the things you own, your computer, where you live, where you work, any place and any time. And that is the moment you become pure consciousness. And that is the moment your consciousness can merge with greater consciousness. And when you create from the field instead of from matter, you can exert greater effects on the nature of reality. So I know it's new for a lot of people. We get a lot of questions about this particular topic, but I can assure you, if you keep applying the formula, you'll begin to understand what you're doing and why. So give it some time, give it some practice. Many people are doing it very well. We've measured it thousands and thousands of times. The purpose is to create more brain coherence.
Welcome back, creators. So I hope that gave you some amazing insight into what space actually is. A lot of times when we think space, we want to debate it in terms of physical science, the abstract concept, or talking about even more concrete concepts. But it goes more than a concept, as you can see now. It's more of a feeling. Instead of thinking it in the abstract way of there's just space around me, or space is something in between my couch and my television set, actually feel the space. You can do this, by just closing your eyes, taking a deep breath. When you're meditating, feel the environment around you. And when you do that, you actually make a huge change. You go from this 3D reality into the quantum reality, as Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about. And really, the concept of space no longer just becomes an idea, it becomes something you experience. So fellow creators, I hope you enjoy experiencing space, experiencing all that's around you in this creative universe, and using that power to create your reality. So I'd love to know, what were your insights when you heard him talk about space? Is there anything you're interested in, particularly after hearing this? I'd love to know in the comments below, so be sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell to get more videos like this, like the video, and leave me some comments letting me know what you thought. Have a great day.